Hi there, everyone. It's Russell. Welcome to the Reading Fabricator. I hope you're all doing well. And today is the beginning of my multi-series on Cormac McCarthy. And I thought I'd start with his debut novel, The Orchard Keeper. It's one of only three books I have left of his to get through, the other two being the part 2 and part 3 of the Border trilogy. And this was the book that I was dreading the most. It really was. I really wasn't looking forward to it. But having finally actually gone through it, I liked it. I actually liked it more than I thought I would. It exceeded my expectations, although it is not without its flaws, and I do have quite a few issues with it. Currently, I will probably have it as my least favorite Cormac McCarthy novel. Not that that's a bad thing, because in my mind, he has yet to have written a bad novel. So even though this is my least favorite of all his works, it's still decent. It's still up there in terms of American literature. Published in 1965, so almost 60 years ago he published his first novel, and yet he keeps on publishing. Released his last two books last year, so that's quite a time span considering he's only done 12 novels. Winner of the 1966 William Faulkner Foundation Award for most notable first novel, and I can definitely see why. This is the most Faulknerian I have seen Cormac McCarthy, and I have read his other Southern Gothic stuff, including Outer Dark and Child of God, and even elements of Suttree, but this was the closest to resembling Faulkner in my mind, and there were certain sections where I was just getting that sense of like the parts that I read out of Absalom, or even tiny bits of The Sound and the Fury, even though I never actually finished that book there. For some reason, I just can't get into William Faulkner. I'm not quite sure why. And if I'm being honest with you, even though I liked it, the pure reason why I like this book is for its prose style, the way he's bringing all these $1,000 words and crafting sentences that describe the Tennessee wilderness, the Tennessee woodlands, which makes quite the main backdrop of this whole book. But if I'm going to be completely honest with you, there are large passages in this relatively short novel where I had absolutely no idea what was going on, and I feel that this will give me a reason to reread it in the future. Honestly, the first 50 pages of this book, I actually went through quite easily. I was able to keep up with it. I was able to get on its wavelength in terms of prose style. I was able to dictate which characters were who and what they were saying. But then around Act 2 onwards, I just got completely lost. And the only way I was able to tell what was potentially happening was by who was talking. Just the way it describes things is almost in a very hazy, it's like going through a hazy fog. You know, the elements are there, but it's up to you to pick up the pieces and put it together yourself. And it wasn't until the final 50 pages where I was able to piece things together and get back on its wavelength again. So there's a huge chunk in the middle there where I just, I'll be honest with you, I was completely lost. So I had to resort to going online and looking up plot descriptions of the book and able to keep along with it. But the book itself is set in the period between the two world wars, I believe, and there are parts of it where I think it's set in 1941. I wasn't quite sure, in a small isolated community in Tennessee. I mean, this is purely takes place in the backdrop of Tennessee, and the way the township is described, including this place called the Greenfly Inn, which is this bar. There's sort of just this makeshift bar where everyone congregates at times, and the whole premise of the I guess you can call it the Red Branch community is almost like an Eden, like a Garden of Eden where nothing is disturbed. And then what ends up happening is throughout the story you have this idea of threat and of violence that is encroaching on the community, which leads it to become desolated by the end of the book, and through the eyes of the young John Wesley Radnor, who's about 14 years old, of which there are no physical characterizations of him. Not that I could remember from reading the book. You don't get a sense of who he is as a person. Rather, he's just this entity that exists. But he lives alone with his mother, and he is highly independent. He just seems to do things for himself, and it seems to have quite a lot of smarts for someone of his young age. He goes out there and sets traps to catch wildlife, and is generally considered quite a good-natured kid in general. The other two main characters in this book, are Marion Silda, who is an outlaw, bootlegger, and throughout the book becomes something of a father figure to John Wesley Ratner. There's an altercation that happens in the first 50 pages of the book in Act 1, which basically sets the whole thing into motion. So after leaving a bar, Marion is about ready to leave, and this unemployed man who, as far as I can tell, is unnamed until quite later in the book. And he has a connection to the main character, John, in this book. I'm not going to spoil in what way. But he asks for a lift with the guy, and he proceeds to give him the lift. And this guy just won't shut up. This character just seems to keep on talking and talking and talking about marrying and just wants to shut him up. And it leads to this person trying to rob him and carjack him, and they end up crashing the car. And what proceeds from there is the first act or incident of violence, and the first incident of violence to appear in a Cormac McCarthy book. And I was waiting for it to appear, and it's just as brutal as some of his other descriptions in some of his other work. It just you could tell that from the get-go, the threat of violence that pervades Cormac McCarthy's work was always there from his debut novel on upwards. So this is from page 40. This is the incident I was talking about. Whether he fell forward or whether the man pulled them over, he did not know. They were lying in the road, the man with his face in the dirt and Silda on top of him, motionless for the moment as resting lovers. Something in Silda's shoulder travelled obliquely down to his lungs, with each breath to cut off the air. He still had one hand locked in the man's neck, and now he inched himself forward and whispered into his ear, "Why don't you say something now, bastard? Ain't you got some more talk to spill for us?" He was jerking at the man's head, but the man had both hands over it and seemed lost in speculation upon the pebbles of the road. Silda let his hand relax and wander through the folds of the neck until they arrived at the throat. The man took that for a few minutes, then suddenly twisted sideways, spat in Silda's face, and tried to wrench himself free. Silda rolled with him and had him then flat backward in the road and astride him. Still the one arm swinging from his broken shoulder like a piece of rope, he crept forward and placed one leg behind the man's head, elevating it slightly, looking like some hulking nurse administering to the wounded. He pushed the head back into the crook of his leg, straightened his arm, and bore down upon the man's neck with all his weight and strength. The boneless-looking face twitched a few times, but other than that showed no change of expression. Only the same rubbery look of fear, speechless and uncomprehending, which Silda felt was not his doing either, but the everyday look of the man. And the jaw kept coming down, not on any detectable hinges, but like a massive offal, some obscene waste matter uncongealing and collapsing in slow folds over the web of his hand. He has a taste for describing violence. So I find that to be quite a fascinating point of the book. Now, here's one issue I take with it. Now, I know who the man is that he murdered, and it's also talked about in the Wikipedia page as well. But I wasn't aware who he was until at the end of the book. But I want to know if anyone out there who's read The Orchard Keeper actually was aware of who this man was and what his name was in the first 40 pages before that incident. Because what I found was on the back of this book, in the blurb section, it basically spoils it for you as to what happens, which really I was not happy about. So I want to know if anyone figured that out for themselves, or if they had it spoiled by the back of the book. There are revelations that come to pass at the end of the book with regards to that murder and the connections to the main character, John Wesley Ratner. But it had no emotional weight for me because I knew it beforehand anyway. So was anyone else out there a bit annoyed by how it spoiled it for you on the back of their book, or is it just on this copy that I have here? I'm curious to know. And this is probably his least read book. There's not many people out there that have read it, and for all intents and purposes, I would say that I would encourage people out there to read this book last, finish off his bibliography. Although there's a crazy part of me that says read this book first. That way, everything you read after it is nothing but golden in comparison. Now, after Marion kills the man, he dumps him in a pit near this orchard, which is next door to this man by the name of Arthur Ownby, who's a hermit who lives up in the mountains with his pet dog, who witnesses the event and decides to cover it up and not say anything to the authorities about it. And then a long time later, Marion starts his profession as a bootlegger and starts taking alcohol to and from, using Arthur Ownby's plot of land as sort of a pickup point. And that's where all these characters start congregating and they start meeting one another. This is where when Marion crashes the car into a creek, he runs into John Wesley, and they sort of develop this father-bond relationship from there on out to the end of the book. And then you've got these authorities that are after them, trying to get at them, and thus progresses until the very end. I'm not going to spoil any more there because I think you should find it for yourself. But again, I read it in a very hazy sense of mind. I was only able to pick up on small things, and what I really should have done was read a chapter and then looked up a review of that chapter in order just to get my head around it. Because honestly, I'm not kidding when I say this. There are certain sections that I really had trouble with getting through. But what pushed me through in the end with this book was the descriptions, was the prose. McCarthy had it from the get-go. He really, really did. What I think about the plot and how it's depicted is irrelevant. Is irrelevant to its writing style in my mind. Sure, it'd be good to have a great plot, but his writing style more than makes up for it. It truly, truly does. I have a list of notes here of all these little sentences that are littered throughout the book that are just absolute perfection in my mind. Absolute perfection. Page 21. With one foot he tapped out the time of some old ballad against the corner post of the porch. From under the brim of the roof he studied the movements of stars. A night for meteors tonight. They cannaded the towering hump of Red Mountain. Rain falling now from a faultless sky. This is a personal favourite for me, page 73. The morning is yet to the nether end of the earth, and he is weary, bowing the grass like sadness. The dew followed him home and sealed his door. That's probably my favourite sentence in the entire book. I really, really like that one. Page 181. A warm wind on the mountain and the sky darkening, the clouds looping back black underbellies until a huge ulcer folded out of the mass and a crack like the earth's core rending rattled panes from Winkle Hollow to Bays Mountain, and the wind rising and gone colder until the trees bent as if borne forward on some violent acceleration of the earth's turning, and that too ceased, and with a clatter and hiss out of the air still a plague of ice. Page 189. Sheets of spray gusted over the smoking road and over the swamped land, the houses standing bleak and grey. A final desolation seemed to come, as if on the tail of the earth last winter, and a well of water were rising slowly up through the very universe itself. And the final paragraph is towards the end of the book. There is no spoilers in this whatsoever. I just think it's a brilliant paragraph. Toward early morning he woke, sat up quickly and looked about him. It was still dark, and the fire had long since died. Still dark and quiet, with that silence that seemed to be of itself listening. An astral quiet where planets collide soundlessly. Beyond the auricular dimension altogether, he listened. Above the black ranks of trees, the midsummer sky arched cloudlessly and coldly starred. He lay back and stared at it, and after a while he slept. So, as you can see, I've read a variety of passages which span most of the book, and it's always there. For every 10 or so pages where I'm a bit iffy, I find a little nugget of gold, a little bit of juice that puts my faith back into the book. And as I said before, this isn't my favourite McCarthy book, but I still like it. I still recommend it as a piece of reading material, as a way to cap off McCarthy's bibliography. And just the way he describes the Tennessee wilderness and all that is just second to none. It's beautiful, beautiful prose. Stunning, absolutely stunning prose. More than makes up for my problems with how the plot is progressed throughout. And the ideas, the main themes are like father-son relationships. The whole thing is biblical in nature. There's just this real sense of like Old Testament style thematics that are going on. The idea of loss of innocence, the threat of violence that is always encroaching on an area, and how it's integrated into the novel's space. And these are all themes that are present throughout all of McCarthy's work. You can see the beginnings of it in this book and how it progresses into his much larger and infinitely better bibliography. So I always found it difficult to approach this book. I was always cautious about it, and I'm still cautious now that I've read it. But I'm proud of myself for reading it, and I'm not ashamed to say that I liked it. And I do think that, every author has to start somewhere, right? Every author has to start somewhere. So for this to be his worst book in my mind, it just shows just how greater he got as a writer, how much he learned, how much he was able to conjure, how much he was able to take in knowledge-wise and produce this body of work that's so well revered today, at least in comparison to most other writers that are still alive and even dead. He is the greatest living writer, and I stand by that, even though this isn't my favourite McCarthy book. But there's not much more to say about it, unfortunately. So enough about that. Tell me what you think. Did you have the same reservations about The Orchard Keeper that I did? Or did you love the book? Are you one of those that consider this to be one of his best pieces of work? I'm really, really curious to those that love the book, and try and persuade me to read it again. Let me know what I should be taking in and how I should approach the book the next time I reread it, because I will be rereading it. I want to reread all of McCarthy's work, and there's already some that I've already read 2 or 3 times, including the one that I'm now reading, which is All the Pretty Horses, in preparation for Book 2 and Book 3 of the Border Trilogy. And I am already enjoying All the Pretty Horses a hell of a lot more than the first time I read it. I appreciated it the first time, but what I'm seeing more in All the Pretty Horses with this reread is just how great the similes are. And I've already written down a few that I'm going to share with you in that video there. So I'm really looking forward to talking about All the Pretty Horses. It's a great read. It really, really is. But thank you so much for watching, and yeah, give the Orchard a go if you're willing. Even if you don't like it, it's still better than most of the stuff that's out there. I guarantee that. Thanks very much, and see you on the next one. Bye.